Have you ever heard a voice so pure, it seemed to rise above pain itself, a voice born not in comfort, but in hunger, rain, and forgotten corners of a city? This is the story of Miguel Santos, a 15-year-old boy from the crowded streets of Manila, whose voice carried the ache of 1,000 sleepless nights. He had no stage, no microphone,
Please
no fancy
subscribe to our
clothes,
channel.
only a small tin can that echoed with the sound of spare coins and dreams. Beside him, life was a silent witness. His younger sister, Laura, just 8 years old, would often sit on a broken step nearby, clutching an old stuffed toy, their mother's last gift before she passed. Lara's eyes carried both pride and fear, pride for her brother's courage, fear of what tomorrow might bring. And somewhere far away, across oceans and bright lights, destiny was quietly waiting, on a stage called International Got Talent, IGT, where thousands came chasing fame, but only a few arrived carrying truth. How does a boy with nothing but a cracked guitar and a trembling voice end up standing before Simon Cowell himself? How does pain turn into music so powerful that it could silence a crowd and make the harshest critic wipe away a tear? As the world rushes forward, chasing success and spotlight, Miguel's story reminds us that sometimes, the greatest voices are not heard in studios or arenas, they echo from alleyways, from those who sing not for applause, but for survival. This is not a story of talent alone. It's a story of love, loss, and the kind of faith that grows in darkness. It's about a brother who sang for his sister, and in doing so, touched millions. Before the lights, before the fame, before the tears, there was just a boy, a song, and a dream strong enough to move the world. Miguel Santos was not like other 15-year-olds. While most boys his age were in classrooms, laughing with friends, or scrolling through phones, Miguel's mornings began beneath the rusted awning of a small bakery in the heart of Manila. He'd wake before sunrise, his body sore from the concrete
Please subscribe to our
his
channel.
First thought not of breakfast, but of survival. He carried with him a small guitar, its wood cracked, its strings uneven, yet it was his most precious belonging. He had found it in a garbage pile 2 years ago, cleaned it, and learned to make it sing. Every chord carried a story, every note a memory. Music was his only escape from the weight of poverty, from the memories of his mother's voice fading away in a hospital room they couldn't afford. Miguel's father, once a fisherman, had disappeared after the typhoon took their home. Since then, Miguel had taken the role of both brother and protector to little Lara. She was the reason he smiled even when hunger pressed against his ribs. Every coin he earned from singing went to buy her rice, or sometimes, a piece of bread they'd share under a flickering streetlight. Despite everything, Miguel wasn't bitter. He carried a quiet gentleness, the kind that made strangers stop and listen. His eyes always seemed to be searching the sky, as if asking the stars when his mother would hear his songs again. Every evening, after the rush of the city slowed, he'd hum softly to himself, his voice echoing through the narrow alleyways. He wasn't chasing fame, only peace. Yet, deep inside, there was a hidden spark, a longing to be seen, to be heard beyond the streets that had become his stage. Miguel's life was simple, repetitive, yet filled with small moments of grace, sharing laughter with Lara over leftover bread, watching sunsets paint hope across the polluted sky, and whispering promises to his mother's photograph that one day, his voice would change their fate. He didn't know how, or when. But he believed that music, the only thing he truly owned, could one day open a door to a life beyond the streets. Life had never been kind to Liam Santos. He had known the taste of hunger, the sting of rejection, and the quiet ache of growing up too soon. But nothing hurt more than the day he lost his mother. It had been an ordinary morning, the sun rising over the harbor, the smell of salt in the air, when the storm came. His mother had gone to work early, as she always did, determined to earn enough for his school fees. But that day, the sea turned violent. The winds howled, waves crashed against the wooden docks, and by the time the storm passed, she was gone. No one could find her. Liam was only 8. The sound of her laughter vanished from their small home, replaced by silence. He had no father, no relatives nearby. Just Miko, the little monkey who seemed to understand his every tear. Nights became endless. He would lie awake, clutching his mother's old scarf, listening to Miko's soft breathing beside him. The world moved on, but Liam didn't know how to. The streets became his classroom. The beach became his home. He sang not for applause, but to remember, because when he sang, it felt like his mother could still hear him. Yet, deep inside, he carried a fear he never spoke of. What if no one ever saw him for who he truly was? Sometimes he'd see kids his age with their parents, holding hands, laughing, carrying school bags, and he would look away. The loneliness was sharp, almost physical. His songs became softer, his smiles fewer. Even when he performed for coins in the market, he sang with his eyes closed, as if afraid to meet the world's gaze. Miko became his voice when he couldn't speak. The little monkey would tug at his shirt, bring him crumbs, wrap his tiny arms around Liam's neck whenever the tears came. It was in one of those quiet, lonely nights, beneath a sky full of indifferent stars, that Liam made a silent promise: someday, somehow, he would sing on a stage where the world had to listen. Not for fame. Not for pity. But for the mother who never got to hear him finish his song. It happened on a day that began like any other: humid air, the smell of fried rice from a nearby stall, and the soft chatter of a small Filipino town waking up. Liam was sitting near the marketplace, singing quietly to Miko, hoping a few coins might fall into his dented tin cup. His voice was gentle, cracked, but filled with emotion that made even the vendors pause for a moment before returning to their busy lives. That morning, a woman wearing a bright blue cap stopped to listen. She didn't say a word, just stood there, watching the boy and the little monkey performing beneath the shade of an old mango tree. When Liam finished, the woman knelt down and smiled softly. She introduced herself as a local talent scout, visiting her hometown from abroad. Her eyes sparkled with both curiosity and warmth. She told Liam about America's Got Talent, a show where ordinary people did extraordinary things. Liam didn't understand much at first, but when she showed him clips on her phone, the lights, the crowd, the judges, his eyes widened. It looked like another world, far away from the dusty roads he knew. He laughed shyly and shook his head. "No one would want to see me," he whispered under his breath. But the woman didn't give up. She gave him her contact card and said, "Sometimes, the world needs to see what kindness looks like." Then she left, disappearing into the noise of the market. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, Miko on his lap, staring at the stars. The scout's words replayed in his mind. He had never dreamed that someone like him could stand on a stage like that. But when Miko placed his tiny hand on Liam's chest, the same way he always did when he wanted comfort, something inside Liam shifted. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't courage. It was faith. For the first time, he felt that maybe his mother's love hadn't vanished with the waves. Maybe she had sent that woman his way. The next morning, with trembling hands and a hopeful heart, Liam filled out the AGT online audition form, unaware that his life, and the life of his little monkey, was about to change forever. The journey from the streets of Manila to the shining stage of International Got Talent was not a fairy tale. It was a storm Miguel had to walk through barefoot. When he boarded the airplane for the first time, his heart pounded harder than any rhythm he had ever played. Everything felt unreal: the lights, the cameras, the luxury of a hotel room, the endless rehearsals. But beneath the wonder, there was fear, a deep, haunting fear that he didn't belong. Every contestant around him wore fine clothes, spoke fluent English, and carried confidence like armor. Miguel, with his second-hand shoes and trembling hands, felt small, a street boy standing among stars. Each night, he would call Lara through a borrowed phone. Her voice grew weaker, but her words steadied him. She reminded him of why he sang: not for fame, not for money, but for love. "Sing for us, Kuya," she would whisper. And he would close his eyes, remembering the sound of Manila rain, the smell of bread from the bakery, and the way their mother used to hum before sleeping. Rehearsals were grueling. His nerves often got the better of him.
Please subscribe to our channel.
His timing slipped. There were moments he almost gave up, moments when he stood backstage, staring at the exit door, ready to leave everything behind. But each time, he remembered Lara's smile, fragile yet full of hope. That memory became his strength. He learned that courage wasn't about never being afraid, it was about singing through the fear. Each mistake became a lesson, each tear a quiet vow to do better. Slowly, he began to find his rhythm again, not just in music, but in faith. Miguel discovered that his voice wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real, raw and full of the cracks that came from surviving. The audience didn't need a polished star. They needed a story, a soul. By the time his name was called for the live audition, Miguel had changed. He was no longer just the boy from the streets. He had become something greater, a symbol of every dreamer who dared to rise from the dust and sing. When Miguel stepped off that grand stage, the lights behind him dimming and the roar of the audience echoing in his ears, he didn't feel like a star, he felt like a son, a brother, and a survivor who had finally been heard. Simon Cowell's tears, the golden confetti, the standing ovation, all of it felt like a dream. But deep inside, Miguel knew the true miracle wasn't the applause. It was that his song had reached hearts far beyond what he could see. News of his performance traveled back to the streets of Manila. People who once passed him by without a glance now gathered around their small televisions, watching the boy who had once sung for coins now sing for the world. Even Lara, lying in a hospital bed, smiled through her tears as she watched her brother's face light up the screen. In that moment, she wasn't just proud, she was healed in spirit, knowing her brother's voice had given meaning to their pain. But Miguel's story didn't end with fame. He returned home months later, still humble, still carrying his old guitar. He began using his platform to help children who lived as he once had, kids with dreams trapped behind hunger and fear. He built small music programs, taught them songs, and told them that even when the world seems deaf, they must never stop singing. Through his journey, Miguel learned that success is not measured by trophies or lights, but by the lives we touch along the way. His mother's words echoed in his heart, that pain, when carried with faith, becomes the purest form of art. And so, his music became more than melody, it became a prayer, a bridge between struggle and hope. Miguel's story reminds us all that sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the quietest places, from those who have known loss, hunger, and loneliness. Because when they sing, they don't just perform, they heal. In the end, the boy who once sang for survival taught the world something far greater. That even in the darkest corners, a single voice, pure and honest, can still reach heaven.